This past weekend, we saw a back injury. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and if you're new here on this channel, I teach you about sports medicine topics. So if you're interested, be sure and subscribe to stay up to date with future videos for all the upcoming sports seasons. Quick side note, before we dive into this and people say I'm just trying to stir up drama and controversy for clicks, recall the impact that reviewing this stuff can actually have. This was Tom Savage, right? A number of years ago, he gets hit. We see him on the field. He's doing this sort of tremulous posturing, kind of seizure-like activity, comes out of the game, returns to the game after we witnessed this on the field. At that time, there was nothing in the NFL concussion protocol specifically looking for this posturing or seizure-like activity as a sign of a head injury. After this, the protocol was reviewed, the protocol was updated and made better, and is now better today because of the reaction and sort of the review of this episode. So looking at these things can have a positive impact, and I really think can impart positive change to make the game safer. One of the first things to think of when we're concerned about a concussion is, was there a mechanism that could explain a concussion? Here, clearly Tua falls backward, hits his head on the turf. We can check that box off. Now, that doesn't mean that just because we see an athlete fall and hit their head on the turf, that they've sustained a concussion. Other things have to occur in terms of how that fall might have affected the brain. But item number one, check. We've got a clear mechanism that could explain a concussion if the right presenting signs and symptoms were to develop. Before we look at all of his stumbles and head shakes that we saw, I think it's helpful to go look at the actual NFL concussion protocol. This is from the NFL's updated concussion protocol. You can go read this, it's publicly available online, and it outlines what we call these no-go signs and symptoms. So signs are something that you can observe, something like seizure, loss of consciousness, whereas symptoms are something the athlete feels or might report, like confusion, nausea, or headache. What these are things that if they're observed at any point per the protocol, somebody is removed from the game, there's no return, they're in concussion protocol. Specifically, their loss of consciousness, something that was added recently, includes seizure and that fencing response or posture, right, where the arm kind of gets extended. So if you see that, automatic, doesn't matter what else happens, concussion protocol. Gross motor instability, which we'll get back to, confusion and amnesia or memory loss. This gross motor instability is, of course, what people are focusing on here when we see somebody stumbling on the field, because when you have a concussion, one of the symptoms is loss of balance or potentially vision impairment, which can certainly lead to gross motor instability or stumbling. What they specifically say is that identified in the judgment of the club medical staff in consultation with the sideline independent neuroconsultant who observe the player's behavior, have access to their history, and are able to rule out an orthopedic cause for any observed instability. So what this really means is that if somebody looks unstable after a mechanism that could explain a concussion, the people evaluating them basically have to rule out that it wasn't some orthopedic thing that caused it, right? So there wasn't like a dislocated knee or a broken ankle or something else that clearly would have prevented the athlete from being able to walk. So that means that when they see this replay and look at this footage of him stumbling around, kind of shaking his head, but having that gross motor instability, they have to be comfortable that this was orthopedic in nature. It was something with the bones, muscles, joints, tendons, ligaments that made him stumble like this. And I think that's where all of this just gets to be a huge mess. It's very hard for me to feel comfortable saying that what we are witnessing on the field here is the result of back spasms or back pain or even an ankle injury. First of all, when people have back spasms or pain, they usually stiffen up. Their body doesn't go just completely limp and flaccid like they're going to fall to the ground. But aside from that, we see multiple times here. We see Tua sort of shake his head, right? You heard old school announcers would talk about, well, he's clearing out the cobwebs. And we see Tua do that multiple times. First time here when he gets up, a little bit of a head shake right there. Going down the field, again, a little bit of a head shake. Still walking down the field, stumbles, reaches up, starts to kind of grab for his head, grab for his helmet, and we see another little head shake right there. Those are all things that make me so much more concerned, and honestly, everybody in the public watching this, about a concussion and not something like a back spasm causing a player to act like that and have that reaction, especially after we've seen a hit to the head with his fall. What plays out in the media then is also just fascinating to see after something like this, because of course, after the hit, we saw everybody on Twitter like, oh my goodness, this looks like a head injury. I hope Tua is okay. This was a scary moment. And then as it comes out that it's being explained as a back injury, people are honestly like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. We even had on the Pat McAfee show, they were talking about, I mean, come on, like this clearly looked like it was a head injury.
I mean,
Fascinating decision.
no way. There's no wasn't a back injury. Like, you see him shake his head. You see his hands go up to his head once he goes down. Like, it just wasn't a back injury. And I know that they have, like, cracked down on concussions, but I feel like now more than ever, guys will get a concussion and play the next week.
Playing the next week isn't so unusual. The protocol clearly allows for people to go through that 5-step sequence. But what they're saying, I mean, yeah, people just casually watching this see that, and I think have witnessed enough head injury discussion, seen enough discussion about this to recognize what looks like a concussion. I'm glad the NFL Players Association is looking into this, because I think people should be asking how a back injury can lead to those things, how a back injury explains the shaking of the head, how a back injury leads to that degree of sort of flaccid, gross instability. Because sports fans watching this aren't uneducated to this stuff anymore. We're aware of what's going on. We're aware of these protocols and how head injuries present themselves. So then to get a narrative that counteracts what the public thinks is a head injury just confuses things even more. So look, concussions can be tough to diagnose, right? There's no clear gold standard other than when we see these observable signs, but there often is a subjective component to it. Nobody is perfect, especially when you introduce that level of subjectivity, but I think we then now have the value of video where we can look and say, okay, was there something else where it does make sense to explain the back? Can somebody explain the physiology or why a back injury could lead to that type of presentation? Because the public needs to be educated about this stuff. We need to have consistent messaging about head injuries, and it doesn't work anymore to just brush it off as other things. That's it for the end of the video, everybody. Hopefully Tua is doing okay. Remember, concussion symptoms can always be delayed, and he might have been feeling okay after the game. He might have been feeling okay in the second half, but things could present themselves later on. Hopefully his back feels okay. I'm not doubting that his back was bothering him. I'm not doubting that his ankle was bothering him. I'm just doubting how those could perfectly explain that degree of gross motor instability, as well as particularly the head shaking that we saw, just so happening to be after he hit his head. Hopefully we get some answers to these questions about this, but as always, I hope this was educational. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later.